Hey, everybody. I'd like to thank Nick, firstly, for doing his best Spider-Man impression. But that's what this conference was missing the whole time, and he finally came through. So that was really good. Thanks, Nick. And I am Torrey Rice, as Nick mentioned, highly unqualified to be doing this for the third year. And with me, as he mentioned, is Anders, Daniel, and Ryan. Now everyone knows who Anders is, so because there's no name tags, let's go with Daniel, if you want to give a wave. There we go. So by process of elimination, Ryan is the other person sitting in a nondescript bunker in the middle of the Midwest, I believe, is what I heard. All right. Oh, as mentioned, this is a podcast of sorts. And I'd like to also just thank real quick Anthony and Sam, who did some of the other podcast things that have been played throughout the day. So that was really great. And as the young kids say, you can like and subscribe, I believe, at the website, which is TalkScript.fm, because, you know, FM radio is a big thing now. So, all right. So we have like 30 minutes, but we may run over, and it's fine. I'm sure you guys you can leave if you don't want to stick around. Not you guys, like the people out there. Like, you guys got to stay here the whole time.
Okay.
All right. So we got some Q&A, and then we've got some a game to play. We're gonna play Never Have I Ever later. So let's just start right in on the questions. The first question actually comes from me because I made this, so I can skip the line. All right. So, how has COVID-19 and working from an anarchist city full of murder hornets affected TypeScript development this year?
Well, it's strangely, and it's changed everything, and it's changed nothing, right? I mean, we haven't seen each other in person for, what is it now, 7 months? Yet we've shipped all the products we said we were going to ship with as many features that we said they were going to have. So it's a weird world. We're all sort of in this holding pattern, I feel like, you know. But the train keeps on moving, and
do you think that's a lot to do with how you guys had to kind of embrace? You've talked before about really embracing the open source aspect of being open source, and is that kind of a big driver?
I would like to say so. I mean, ever since we've been on GitHub, we've moved, I think, more and more of our stuff into the open, right? And so, like, there's no internal processes. You don't need to be on like the internal Microsoft corporate network, which for most of the stuff that you need to do, which is like harder in some ways now, weirdly, but getting better. But because it's just mostly on GitHub, even our planning is on GitHub, right? Like, we've got public release dates, so I don't need to like email someone an internal process document or whatever. I just give them a URL to the issue tracker, which is nice.
It's nice. Okay, next question. It just says anonymous here, so I think they were watching maybe V for Vendetta or something. I don't know. What's the current status of the specification, and can we expect a new spec at some point in the future?
I have a follow-on answer, but I can give some background. If one of you can jump in and interrupt me if you want. Basically, you know, we have an open source implementation, and you know, we've tried to collaborate with different teams that have shown interest in the spec in a lot of ways over time. But it never goes that deep into the level of detail that a full formal specification needs in the first place. And the activity of the compiler development is just so fast that it is hard to keep up with it sometimes. And so we've mostly just tried to help most implementations out with like whatever they need in terms of adding functionality, anything like that. But I think the thing that we've heard the most is that there is interest in like a grammar spec, right? Like, what are the grammatical additions that TypeScript adds on top of JavaScript? Because most of these tools that are interested in this stuff are often trying to like transform TypeScript, parse it, do code highlighting, do linting in some way. And when we were doing work to like add the initial functionality to Babel, or like others have just tried to add functionality to ESLint initially, that was a pain. They had to kind of go through everything manually. So we are investigating a grammar spec right now, just in terms of like what might go in. It's not something that, I don't know what the long-term status will be, but it's something I'm currently experimenting with. Looks promising. I'm just going through version by version, adding new stuff, and that's surprisingly going well. So I'll keep people posted, and hopefully something will come of that.
I think as a couple adjuncts to that is that if there's a process that the TypeScript type system does that you don't understand and you can't figure it out from whatever resources are already out there, please ask, just file a doc bug and say, hey, I don't understand how generic inference collects candidates. Here's what I've seen so far. And that is I will write that documentation for you, whoever you are out there, anonymous, or I will make Daniel do it. And I might have to talk to Anders and figure it out, but I think if we sat down as humans and tried to write down like a human understandable version of what we think the TypeScript compiler does, you would just get some other type system for the most part, because we haven't written, you can't kind of go back and figure this all out. It would be an endeavor that would stop all other development, as far as I would say.
Yeah, I would say also our, just sort of our documentation resources, or the time that we allot to that, I think are better spent writing the handbook, and writing a grammar spec, because the grammar spec, I think there are really multiple implementations of other tools out there that have a need for a grammar spec, but there are really no other alternate implementations of the compiler. So having all the way down into the minute detail spec of what the compiler does it would be an enormous undertaking, and honestly it would slow us down quite a bit, and it still wouldn't be as precise as the source code itself. So we sort of consider.
I think this is all just your guys' way of covering up for that. This really is voodoo. But
No.
I mean, that's fine. we can't document it. It wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to understand it. Yeah. Okay.
The phrase is the code is right.
All right. The next question, I guess, makes sense, and I will just read it as it's again from anonymous. You've made a Turing complete type system. Congratulations, I guess. My main question is, how can I debug it? How can I figure out when it's slow, when and why it's slow?
Yeah. This is something that we are seeing. I will readily admit to that. When you write complicated recursive conditional types, or that like say instantiate huge union types or map types or whatever, all of a sudden things can just sort of go off in forever land and just keep instantiating types like crazy, and you have no idea why or where it went. At other times, it can be hard to understand why the types don't work out. We do actively think about it. We actually have an entire resource devoted to coming up with ways of better profiling, and I think we're starting to hone in on some interesting stuff that will probably be in one of our next releases, where at least we can allow you to profile certain hotspots, and get a better idea of is all your time spent in instantiation, or is it spent in relationship checking, or where's the time going? And also we are looking at giving you the ability to understand for every source line in the file, which one consumed the most resources. That might not tell you exactly where the problem is, but it certainly will give you a good starting point. If you know that this function call, and therefore the inference that was performed as a result of this function call, is where the problem starts, then that gives you a starting point. But it is kind of crazy to think that we need, and I hope we don't, but things like a debugger for the type system, or at least maybe the ability to insert sort of the moral equivalent of console.logs in the middle of your types, so you can follow and see what actually happened here.
Okay. All right. Rapid fire. Next question. This one comes from Alex Anderson from the TSConf chat earlier today. What was the inspiration for template literal types? My guess was a fever dream, but that might not be.
Well, if you think about it, and you saw sort of the motivating example, I think I described a little bit in the keynote, this notion that there are so many patterns in JavaScript that manipulate property names using set patterns. Like here's an object with a bunch of properties, and you pass it to a function, and that function creates a proxied object that has a whole bunch of on blah 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 changed or on blah 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 changing event handlers that you can attach to, and it's all based on code performing introspection on objects and then augmenting them. That is really, in a sense, one of the things that we really want to deeply enable, because it is very, very common out there. Another one is this notion of having stringly typed APIs where you pass dotted paths to your properties, or query selectors, or route descriptors, or whatever have you in string arguments. And really, when you pass a literal, it sure would be nice if the compiler could understand exactly how that's going to pan out and what the output type is going to be from something like that. And that's another thing that but ultimately it all rolls up to adding more expressiveness to the type system, basically giving the type system the ability to capture in types more of the things that people commonly do in JavaScript frameworks.
I think in addition to what Anders just said, I think of this as the spiritual successor of like the parts that made sense of regex types. If you go read that issue and all the threads that spun off it, you kind of see that we went down that road and decided like this, we can't figure out a way of this that makes sense. But template literal types do make sense because they kind of exist in the type domain and let people represent, I think, all the things that we thought were good ideas from the regex types proposals that was going around.
Cool. Okay, next question comes also from the TSConf chat from David Josephs, and I picked this out because it's the favorite topic for the last 2 years, which is WebAssembly. In a past TalkScript with the TypeScript team, WebAssembly seemed uninteresting to Anders and the team. Is the TypeScript team more interested in WebAssembly today? AssemblyScript is a strict variant of TypeScript to WebAssembly compiler with sponsors including Shopify and Fastly. Is the team aware of AssemblyScript? I just figured this was a great one to just revisit every year until you finally give in.
So we're aware of AssemblyScript. I think what we've said is basically like someone should go create AssemblyScript. I think was a kind of our position, maybe not the whole time, but that's like what we think a reasonable path forward would look like. And so now it exists, and it's not our job, which is kind of what we're going for. Is like we're not the ones making the subset of JavaScript that you could turn into WebAssembly. So as far as I'm concerned, it's everything's going as planned.
Anyone have any other thoughts, or are we just gonna leave it there?
I don't know if Anders wants to mention that WebAssembly is like a 6502 interpreter, but no.
That would be moral equivalent, at least, yeah.
Right. I mean, I think it's just there's always a subtlety of like, the community really just, if you tell anybody I can give you a fast language, then everyone's on board, right? But you'd never know what you're actually giving up when you're saying, I want a faster language. And it all comes down to the runtime. And that runtime does not have any of the stuff that's built in JavaScript that you know and love, right? So like, how are things like closures represented? How are things like, how is garbage collection implemented and stuff like that? If you don't have an answer to that on a bare bones, or you don't have a platform that has that, which is like WebAssembly, if like you don't have that built in, I think there is garbage collection or something coming, or maybe it is technically there, but you're starting from scratch, which means you have to ship your own standard library. You have to ship your own string comparison functions. You have to ship your own garbage collector and, your own strategy for cleaning up and allocating closures and things like that. And that's not what you think it is.
A JavaScript interpreter running in JavaScript will not be faster than JavaScript.
No.
Right. You're either asking for a full
Yes.
JavaScript interpreter to ship to the browser, or you're asking for C with JavaScript syntax, which is C, almost, kind of.
The way to think of WebAssembly is it is a vehicle for implementing other languages on the JavaScript VM. But the JavaScript VM already understands JavaScript, and it understands it better than any alternate implementation you could write in WebAssembly. So you could never do better by somehow targeting WebAssembly.
Right.
If your subject is JavaScript, and we are a superset of JavaScript, and we're not going to go change the semantics of JavaScript, right? So.
But that said, I think it is cool to see that.
Oh yeah,
TalkScript has some cool stuff going around there, and that there are people who are enjoying it and getting good use out of it too.
And by the way, one feature that we are looking at productizing is the ability to extrude declarations from WebAssembly modules, which, because they come with quite a bit of metadata burned into them that describes their internal, the APIs that they implement and the parameters that each of those entry points take and so forth. And we could actually automatically create the declarations from a WebAssembly module without requiring anyone to manually author that. And that certainly will make the interfacing between TypeScript and WebAssembly easier.
Okay. The next question comes from the chat, and Daniel actually brought this up, and I could not find it in the chat later, so I apologize that I don't know who this is from, but the gist was, are string enums bad? Should they not be used?
They're not bad, but they are also not a JavaScript feature. So it's important to understand that when you're using enums, you are, in a sense, using one of these extensions that we added early on, that given a green field, we probably wouldn't go there. I mean, given, let's say we were starting today, it's not clear that we would go there today. In the early days, it was very different. JavaScript was a much smaller language. JavaScript lacked a whole bunch of features like classes and modules and whatever. We had to go add stuff. And so it didn't seem all that particularly bad to also go at things like namespaces and enums, and so we did. But JavaScript has since grown up dramatically, and we have since, in a sense, changed our operating principles to much more closely align with ECMAScript's evolution. But we also deeply believe in backwards compatibility, and we're never going to take something away that we already implemented. And so enums are there, and they will stay. But you have to understand that if you use them, then there are certain things that are not possible. For example, it is not possible for you to do single module emit from things that contain enums, because we need a type binding phase in order to properly process it.
Const enums, but yes.
Yeah, const enums, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yes, but that's typically what people use, right? So. Yeah,
I kind of I feel strange about this, because at this point, I agree in theory, and yet every time I think to myself on a new project, I'll just use string literal types, and all my projects are just compilers anyway, so it doesn't matter what I think. But but every single time I'm like, I need a tag type, right? So I'll use string literals instead of enums, or string enums or whatever. And then I'm like, but it would be really nice to also declare an uber type for all of the literal types, and I would like them to be displayed as as this thing, but this string is different from that string. And so then you realize, actually, enums have a nice affordance for static analysis, beyond just trying to model the language base layer. And so this is not me trying to say like, you all need enums. But I find it, hard, because like I want to take like the purest view of it's just types on top of JavaScript, and yet it's super clear that there's like some utility there. And in fact, I think, recently Flow added enums as well. And this was something that we had never actually expected, because they had started after us. and that was not something that we would have like predicted at all. But
I would I think I ask why string enums are bad in the chat. So my take on why I personally think string enums are bad, but like obviously you know, like everything that Anders and Daniel said applies and is correct. I think a lot of people don't understand exactly what the difference between writing a string enum and writing like const my string enum equals you know, some mapping of some property keys to some arbitrary strings as const, and manipulating that object, because they have subtly different semantics, and you usually want the const version where you just say const my enum equals an object literal. A key example is like GraphQL. Apollo's GraphQL generator currently emits string enums, and the problem is that like this is getting pretty technical, but like a foo from one string enum is not the same as a foo from another string enum. Usually you want those things to be equivalent, and that can lead to a lot of surprises and like bad behavior. So if you find yourself wanting to write a string enum, I would just say try writing a const instead and manipulating that object. You'll have a better time. The other thing I would say is, unless you're in Daniel's camp and you want like all the things he said, I think there's a lot of like hangover behavior from other languages where string literals are like never checked in any way whatsoever. And people, you know, in C or C# or any other language really other than TypeScript, like magic strings are super, super bad because they're not going to get checked. But TypeScript isn't those languages. You're not flying without a net when you write a string literal. And it's okay to have the same string literal in a bunch of places in your code, as long as there's a type checker that's actually making sure you're doing the right thing there. And so, you know, don't think that it's a per se error or per se bad thing in your code to have that same string literal being in a few different places, you know, unless you have other constraints.
I like how you called it hangover behavior. I think you meant maybe leftover behavior. But
no, he means getting a cheeseburger and just cutting it out. That's what he means.
I wouldn't blame him.
Okay. Up all night writing Steve.
Oh, look, Ryan actually, there's a workshop in there somewhere. Ryan talks about hangover behaviors. I think it's 2020. We all need that help. All right. So this next question comes from Dan in Brooklyn via Twitter. Now, I say Dan because I'm going to read this question, and it's for Daniel, and I have suspicions. I'm just going to admit it. Daniel regularly... Okay, no, I can't read it without laughing. Daniel regularly creates PRs and does code reviews, not activities I usually associate with a PM. I'd love to hear him talk more about what it means to be a product manager for a programming language. Well, thanks, Dan in Brooklyn.
I don't know who wrote this. No, I'm Daniel from Queens, so it's a little different.
Oh, so close.
Yeah,
you threw me off on that.
Totally not me. I think if you ask any language PM what it is that a language PM is supposed to do, no one's really sure. And I've spoken to PMs in different languages. When I tried to decide on if I wanted to take the role on. More recently, I spoke with some people on the Kotlin team of like how they measure success and what they do, and it's all interesting to see like how different companies and teams are in that respect. I came from the engineering side, and so that was always really fun. And we also had a team culture where I think if you're really passionate about something, it's like clearly valuable, like you'll generally be encouraged to take that on, right? And so, working with the community and even doing talks early on as an engineer was something that I was like given the chance to do. And so I've always had like my foot in both sides of engineering and PM. And so, as I try to figure things out for myself, I think the key thing there is like just if it brings value and you're enjoying doing it, and it's not clearly like just causing issues, right? It's not just like writing code for the sake of writing code. Then it's often fair game, and you can often like get other people to critique and get other people involved on the team for this stuff. Continuing to do that helps me get a good idea of like what changes happen in the compiler so that I can come up with like better ideas in some cases. So Andrew showed off partial semantic mode, where like you can load up an editor and you still get like some autocomplete and quick info in a file. And that was stuff that I had, not just said like, hey, what if there was like a lightweight mode? I actually had a sense of, hey, what are the constraints that we have here? What sort of information do we have loaded up in the language service, and like what can we take advantage of? And that's when like some ideas led to other people on the team coming up with like iterations of that. And so like Anders and Chital and others came up with like a much better mode. I think we still have that culture of encouraging people to do stuff that is good and helpful and they enjoy. So like, playground stuff that you just saw from Orta was also a really cool example of that, developed on the website. And then people have focus areas, like someone likes TC39, someone likes something else. So yeah, I sort of encourage that. And also, if you feel like you're often just passionate, just do that. Sorry, this is a long answer. I'll stop.
Well, I was gonna say, I think we've gotten to the point now of absurdity when you said someone likes TC39. I mean, it's like, no, but all right. Just kidding. Sort of, but not really. Yeah, right.
I would add that if you're a strong engineer with like a year or two of experience working on the TypeScript compiler, which Daniel absolutely is, you can implement most features pretty quickly when like not a lot of work. Like I implemented like the undefined index signatures. It took me like a day and a half to get it like somewhat right, and then I handed it off to someone whose full-time job was to make it 100% right. And like sometimes that's the only way to play with something. It's the only way to figure out like how would this actually behave in reality. Is like implement it, see what it does to all the real-world code out there, see what it does to all the test cases, like see if you're about to make a huge mistake. And I think the fact that the compiler is pretty easy to work on, I think helps our ability to iterate and innovate, just because we can just try things out in a PR, and it's actually pretty low effort.
Cool. Okay, so we are coming up to about 4 minutes left. So I think that if you guys got your paddles ready, we're gonna do a game of Never Have I Ever. This one we are gonna play it. Not the drinking game, but you're free to play however you want, honestly. You can play along out at home, however you want to do it. So, all right. So if are you all familiar with the game? So I say, never have I ever, and I say something, and I'm going to just do all the saying because I'm the host, and that's what I'm going to do. And then you hold up your paddle for, I have, or I never have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. And I'll award you random points that don't mean anything or something. It doesn't really matter. Okay. Never have I ever been lazy and used an any type. Right. Never have I ever copy and pasted code from Stack Overflow.
Probably, yeah.
All right. Never have I ever said Brendan Eich's name in vain for early decisions with JavaScript.
Am I going to side of this battle?
I want to quickly get a word in.
Yeah.
In my first month on the team, I was like complaining about some weird behavior, and Anders was like listening in on this conversation. He was like, ECMAScript weirdness is what puts food in your mouth. So
don't complain.
Exactly. Yeah.
Listen, I had that same feeling years ago with IE6. If it didn't exist, I wouldn't have a job. So I hate it. But listen, all right. Never have I ever merged a PR without really reviewing it.
No.
Come on.
I don't think.
All right.
No.
I want to say I'm a little. I want to say I'm a little better than that. But
all right. All right.
I would
never have I ever merged my own PR because I'm pretty sure it's fine.
No, I have not.
I think that happened.
All right. Never have I ever looked at the TypeScript issues list and thought, boy, it sure would be a shame if something happened and all these got deleted.
Ryan.
No, not all of them.
No.
Some of them, probably.
Listen, it's 2020. Just wait till something happens and then use that as cover. No one will notice that there's murder hornets everywhere. They're just like, yeah, all right, the issues are gone. Whatever, it doesn't matter.
There are quite a lot of issues.
Oh man. All right. Never have I ever been told by someone that I didn't understand a nuance of the language that I helped write.
God, I don't think I've been told that.
Oh,
I've been told that.
absolutely.
Wow. Do you want to share, Ryan or Daniel? Because those are my favorite stories.
Well, I should say,
Maybe just all
actually,
it's people
I
who are
have.
like-
I have. When it comes to the module system and module resolution, honestly, I am still at times confused. I think we all are.
People who talk this way are usually well-meaning but misguided, and that happens.
Fair. Okay. Never have I ever, last one. Never have I ever found myself on a live podcast game show and questioned all of my life decisions that led me to this moment.
Not questioning it.
Okay. Well, that is our time today. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for doing this with us again this year. It's really fun, and it's been really great this whole conference. And just lastly, everyone, I'm just going to use this time to say that it's really important. So please remember to vote. It's the best way to send a message about what you want to see in the future. If you want to be part of the solution, please vote by going to github.com/TypeScript and giving thumbs up for the features you want to see implemented. All right. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Although it seems like maybe you were fibbing on a couple of those. Not calling you out or anything.
Which
how-
I feel like we were pretty honest.
I just have one question. How do I convince my team to not ever use any when the creators of the language admit that they use any all the time or have used any?
Oh, not all the time. We have
Not all
used,
the time.
in anger, but
In anger.
well, I mean, it's not like you had much of a choice early on.
True.
But now there are better choices like unknown. So you ought to use that.
I mean, it's
My question for the room is: never have I ever put exclamation mark at the end of an expression that I really wasn't sure if it was undefined or not.
I need a paddle.
Which
No,
one would you
but-
say, Nick?
I have. Yeah, let's do it. Thank you so much, guys. That was great.